Hey guys, what's up? It's Zach from Racing Sim Tools, and I know it's been a while since I've done a video. I'm truly sorry. We've just been really busy with the new website, getting that up and running, and some new features that we've deployed to the new tool. That being said, those things are kind of wrapping up, so I wanted to get a new video out, and today it's going to be a theory video. I'm hoping to do one of these a week going forward. Today we're going to be talking about the vehicle handling model. This is an idea that Race Car Engineering magazine kind of created, and it's something that I use every day. So I want to share it with you guys. Today we'll be talking about what it is, why you should be using it, and my personal workflow for how I use it both in the sim and in real life for any setup work that I do. Before we dive into the vehicle handling model, we first need to differentiate the difference between a first order effect and a second order effect. And we'll be talking about the second order effects when we talk about the vehicle handling model, but we first need to talk about the first order effects. And first order effects are what you guys are very familiar with in the sim racing community for setup work. You might not just know that they're called first order effects, but these are basically talking about the balance of the car, improving understeer or oversteer. And a lot of you will use diagrams that kind of tell you for understeer, change these things, for oversteer, change these things. And those diagrams can be good for someone that's just starting, but a lot of you that are using RST are kind of more the advanced users, and you're already kind of past that. And the reason those diagrams are extremely bad is a lot of them, they don't talk about different phases of the corner. That's where the vehicle handling model is extremely strong. And they don't consider driver specifics. Anytime you're doing setup work, you're really tailoring the setup to give confidence to the driver. If a driver gets in a car and they don't have confidence in the car, they don't know what the car is going to do, they're not going to be able to push the car to its limit repeatedly over a stint. So that's really our main objective when we do setup work, and those diagrams don't consider those things at all. Now that you guys have a understanding of what first order effects are and kind of some of the drawbacks of only considering the first order effects, let's talk about the vehicle handling diagram and second order effects. So in front of you, you'll see the basic shape of the vehicle handling model, and it's a diamond. And each of the corners is going to have a region that we're going to discuss. It's a discrete definition. So the first one that we're going to talk about is stability. And stability, a lot of people think it's understeer. That's not necessarily true. What stability is, and I got this definition from my aerospace instructors when I was going through college, is basically the diagram that you see in front of you. A stable system essentially will return to its initial state once it's disturbed. So here in front of you, you'll see an example of this. There's essentially a valley and then a ball in the center. So you can think of this, if the ball is disturbed to the left or the right, it's going to roll back to the center and rest at that center location, right? Eventually, right? So even though we gave it an initial disturbance, it came back to the same state. So this is what we would describe a stable system. And an example of this with a car would be, maybe you are into a high speed area. Let's just say the double left-hander at Spa, and on the entry you catch a little bit of oversteer. Maybe you trail braked a little bit too hard into that corner, got a little bit too much yaw, and lost some rear downforce. A stable system is going to make it so that you can catch that slide. It's going to kick out just a little bit in the beginning, but you're going to be able to give it some steering input and be able to catch that slide and get it back under control. That would be an example of a stable system that you're able to return to its initial state. An example of an unstable system is going to be the exact opposite. And you're going to see this diagram right in front of you now. And this is basically a ball on top of a hill. So you can imagine the ball is in its initial state at the top. And if you were to push that ball to the left or the right, it's going to roll down the hill and never return to this initial state at the top, right? It's just going to continue to get worse. An example of this for a car, would be the same example we gave before, but maybe something that has snap oversteer. Maybe you're driving through the Spa, and as soon as you get just a slight hint of oversteer, it just gets worse and develops into a spin. That would be an example of a very unstable system, and one that's pretty common in sim racing. The next corner we're going to talk about is another second order effect, and this is response. And this is going to be the lag between driver input and yaw acceleration. So you can think of response. One way that we measure that is with pitch gradients in RST. Higher pitch gradient is going to have a lower response. It's going to feel more sluggish, and something with a low pitch gradient is going to feel very tight and respond very quickly. And before we talk about what the differences are there, let's talk about how a lot of the really fast guys, they put the most importance in the VHM diagram on response. Response is kind of king in a lot of ways because it allows you to put the car on the line that you want to. So this is kind of why the drivers, they really, the really fast guys, the ones that don't need a lot of stability, they can add a lot of response into the car and get it on that line that they need. An example of a something with a high pitch gradient or something that's has a low response time is a soft suspension. A soft suspension will take longer to set. It'll have a higher pitch gradient. So as you give it steering input, there'll be a larger initial time that it takes to respond to that first steering input. The opposite of that would be a very stiff suspension. A stiff suspension is going to get into set very quickly. And we can measure that in RST with the pitch gradient, and it'll have a lower number than something that was very soft. So again, the pitch gradient's a great way to measure response, but response is essentially that lag between initial driver input and the yaw acceleration. Next on the VHM diagram is going to be some of the first order effects, and that's balance. And that's, again, just the understeer, neutral steer, oversteer. A lot of times I refer to this as the lateral shift distribution or the magic number. But this is just the balance of the car at steady state. And the last one is grip. And it's called grip on the diagram, but it's really traction because it's the grip at the contact patch for each tire. So we're not considering grip for the overall car, just the individual tires. And it's not really something that we focus on because usually good grip or traction is a result from having a good compromise in both stability, response, and balance. But it's still on the diagram, still something to be considered. And some setup adjustments will affect grip directly. Maybe sometimes we'll be trading some response. We'll make the suspension a little softer, gain a little bit more mechanical grip. We're trading that response for the grip. So it's still something that we have on the VHM diagram so that we can describe it and understand how different setup adjustments will remove it from that area. One thing that we want to look at with the VHM diagram is how these things are related. So again, we talked about first order and second order. The second order are the stability and response, first order being the grip and the balance. And on the VHM diagram, these things are grouped. You'll now see on the diagram that response and stability, that kind of line is the transient. And what transient is anytime the car is not set. So it's moving into the set condition, either from or away from being set. So this is most of the time corner entry or corner exit. That being said, sometimes you can have transient behavior mid-corner. An example of this would be if you're at mid-corner and there's a bump or something that would cause the displacement of the shock absorber. That might cause some of your dampening to come into effect that would cause it to go into a transient behavior. So you can still have transient at mid-corner, but usually we talk about transient at corner entry and corner exit. And then the other line that's going to connect balance and grip, that's the steady state grip. The steady state line. So this is anytime the car is not in the transient state. So mostly mid corner or heavy straight line braking when you're really getting heavy on those brakes. The car is going to pitch forward and it's going to be in that steady state for a little bit until you start to chill brake and get off of it. So that's the VHM diagram. This is kind of the different regions. But now let's talk about how to use the diagram. So to use this diagram, you really need to use this diagram with your driver, and your driver needs to really understand the definitions for these 4 different areas: stability, response, balance, and grip. When you guys talk about the setup using this diagram, it'll really help identify areas that need to be improved, and it kind of helps isolate different behaviors. For example, a lot of times drivers will talk about corner entry understeer. And corner entry understeer isn't really a balance issue, even though we say understeer. It's actually a response issue. Remember, a response issue is, or a response is the lag between driver input and yaw acceleration. Well, that's what yaw turn in understeer is. When a driver turns in, the car doesn't respond in the initial part, and he kind of misses his line, right? So a lot of people will call that a balance issue. It's not. It's transient. We're moving into the corner. It's just a response issue. So it's really important for you and your driver to understand these definitions. But after your driver and you kind of understand the same lingo, it's really important for anytime you do a setup to do a few laps and then identify what the current setup strengths are. In terms of the diagram, is it strong in response, strong in stability, balanced grip? And you might have one for low speed and one for high speed. That's because an aerodynamics might make a shift in an area. But it's really important to identify what those strengths are. And then also identify where the weaknesses are on the VHM diagram. Maybe the balance is really strong, but response is, really low. Maybe you could trade some of that mid-corner balance for a better response. So it's really important to figure out where those strengths and weaknesses are. And then consider the different setup adjustments that you can make that will basically improve the weaknesses the most without impacting the strengths, impact the strengths the least. Anytime you make a setup adjustment, you are going to impact other areas. The best engineers in the racing communities, they're going to know basically what compromises to make that are going to give them a total net sum that's going to help them get the quickest times. It's all a compromise. So being able to know where you're strong and where you're weak will help you kind of identify what setup adjustments you need to make to get it to where you want to be. So I know a lot of the video up until this point has just been on theory, and a lot of you guys are probably like, okay, Zach, how does this relate to sim racing? How can we make adjustments in sim racing that relate to the VHM to improve our lap times? So I'm just going to go through some of the ACC setup parameters and how they impact the vehicle handling model. And I'll just be talking to it. I have a cheat sheet. I will post it on the Discord, the RST Discord. I'll post a link to the Discord in the channel below, but it'll be available there to download. Again, this is just kind of something to help you, and it's not like a first order diagram. It's not telling you this is how to fix. It's just basically saying right-eyes affect, response stability and balance in this way, and you guys can kind of piece it together to get your VHM where you need it to be for your driver on any specific car. So these setup parameters I'm going to go through are in no specific order, and they are specifically for ACC, just because ACC is one of our bigger user bases for RST. These setup adjustments, the trend or how they impact the VHM will be the same for every game. However, the weight of how much they impact that will be different from game to game and car to car. Some of the games, they use slightly different physics. So maybe a car is more toe sensitive in one game than it is another game. So it's I'm going to leave that up to you guys kind of as homework to figure out what the weights of these things are. But I'm going to talk about what the components are and how they impact the VHM. So the first one we're going to talk about are ride heights. So you can raise the rear. That's going to improve response. That's going to make the car turn in much quicker. You're going to lose a little bit of stability, but you're going to change the balance and turn into more oversteer. So you actually see in ACC, this is really powerful. A lot of setups from setup shops like Coach Dave Academy or Nils or any of the fast guys, they'll have a lot of rake in the car, and this is why they're really trying to improve that response, because again, they're really fast guys. They can have a lower margins for stability, and they really want that response to be really high for the corner entry. Inversely, you could raising the front is going to increase stability. You're going to lose out on response, so it's going to be a little less turn in, but you're going to shift the balance to more understeer. ARBs, so anti-roll bars, increasing the front ARB is going to improve the response, and you are going to shift the balance towards more understeer. If you wanted to increase the rear ARB, you're also going to increase the response, and you're shifting the balance to more oversteer. So again, this is an example of how you could adjust the balance of the car to get more response, and it kind of guides you if you need to adjust the front or the rear. If your main goal is to increase response, and the car is already understeering, you wouldn't want to increase the front, right? You'd want to increase the rear. That's going to increase the response, and it's also going to shift the mid-corner balance more to oversteer. So this is how it's really powerful, so you guys can start kind of piecing things together. Camber, increasing the front camber is going to increase response. It's going to remove some stability and increase the mid-corner bounce a little bit towards more oversteer. Camber is really tricky though. You can go too far with front camber, where you basically decrease the contact patch geometry. And with the front camber, if you increase too much, you actually get a behavior called plowing. And plowing is really notable by mid-corner balance. You're going to have understeer. So the car might, if you have a lot of front camber, the car might, turn in, the response is higher and really turn in really well, but it might start pushing mid-corner. That's plowing, and that's just because you have too much front camber. So there's kind of a window you need to be in. You don't want to go too far. Otherwise, you kind of get the opposite effect, but it's something to look out for. Increasing rear camber, again, you're going to have an increase in response. You're going to have decreased stability. But if you have too little rear camber, again, you're affecting that contact patch geometry. You're going to lose stability, and you're going to have more oversteer at the mid corner. Toe, increasing front toe out is going to increase response. You're going to remove some stability, and you're going to shift the balance at mid corner to oversteer. Increasing rear toe in, you're going to remove some response, so the car's not going to rotate on corner G as well. You're going to increase the stability, and you're shifting the mid corner a little bit more towards understeer. So toe is one of those things, especially in ACC, that's extremely sensitive. A lot of times, just a little bit more rear toe in is really going to make a huge difference in response and stability. It's actually one of my main tuning setup that I do for any kind of car setup, depending on what I'm trying to go for. The next one is brake balance. Increasing the brake balance rearward is going to increase response and decrease stability. Springs, increasing the front spring is going to increase response, and it's going to shift the balance more towards understeer. Increasing the rear spring, again, is going to increase the response and going to shift the balance more towards oversteer. So very similar to the ARB. The main difference between the ARBs and the springs are, again, the weight, how sensitive these things are, and how much of an effect they'll have. Springs are typically going to be much more of an effect than ARBs. ARBs are typically a lot smaller in magnitude, so they're going to be more of a fine-tuning element, where the springs will make a much larger adjustment. And then wings are a really important one. I know a lot of people, really struggle with the wings, and it's really sensitive in ACC. But increasing the rear wing is going to increase the stability. You're going to remove some response, and the balance is going to be shifted a little bit more towards understeer. And again, with the wing, it's going to affect more of the high speed than the low speed, but you'll still see some effect at the low speeds. So that's some of the ACC setup parameters. Again, we're talking about everything in terms of balance, response, and stability. So it really can help you isolate where you need to make these setup adjustments. And the whole idea is to get the best net sum, right? So identifying where you're strong, and then using these setup parameters to get the VHM where you want it to be without impacting it too much. So those are just the ACC ones, but again, this will be any game. You'll have these kind of same trends. The impact or the level, how much of these things will make an effect, is going to be different game to game, but just use these as an example. This list that I went over vocally and on the video, they'll be available to download on the RST Discord, which the link will be down below. So let's get to the last part of the video, which is my personal workflow. And there's never a correct workflow, but this is just something through experience that I have found that has worked for me for both sim racing and my real life race engineering I do for a few local teams. And I know we kind of talked about it before, typically what you want to do, but this is just my personal workflow. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is just get a starting point. You just need somewhere to start, and in ACC, the default aggressives are pretty good. You're not going to need to make too many changes from default aggressive, so it's just a really good starting point. And the first thing that you need to do is you need to make sure you take the driver variability out of the lap times. So you need your driver to be within a tenth or two over a 10 lap stint. If you're, greater than like 3/10, you really want to improve your driver, because when you're looking at the data, you're not going to know if a setup adjustment is the result of improved time, or if it's just the driver becoming, with practice becoming better, or if the driver is making mistakes. So you just need to really get that lap time standard deviation to remove the driver element out of the equation. After you kind of done some laps on the default aggressive, you're within a tenth or two, you need to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses on the VHM. Kind of like we were talking about before. Maybe the car that I have right now is somewhere around here on the VHM. Maybe the balance is pretty good with maybe just a little bit of understeer in some corners and low speed corners. However, the response is really bad. The car doesn't want to rotate in. So again, the car would be somewhere around here on the VHM diagram, which you can see with the red dot. So after you kind of identified the pros and strengths and where you sit on the VHM diagram, you really want to work on the steady state behavior. So the balance of the car. You really want the balance of the car at mid corner to be very neutral. So I will typically figure out if I need to make an adjustment with the balance or not. With most of the time with a default aggressive, the balance is pretty good, so I usually won't make a tweak. If I do, it'll probably be an ARB or spring adjustment, but it should be pretty close. After you identify or tweak the balance or the steady state condition, you want to move on to working on response and stability. So you remember how I said the car that we're working with maybe tends to have a little bit of understeer, but it's pretty good balance, but the response is really bad. Well, maybe we looked through the ACC setup parameters, and what we decided to do is we want to maybe raise the rear. Again, remember, if you raise the rear, you'll get more response, and you'll shift the mid corner balance a little bit more towards oversteer. That would help, in both areas that we kind of commented in. We'll increase the response and we'll shift that balance that was good, but a little bit towards understeer, a little bit towards oversteer, right? So we're moving that balance. So we're kind of getting a pro in both areas. Not every time you'll do that. Sometimes you might have to make a sacrifice in one area to improve another area. And that's just something that each driver will be unique on. Some drivers, very fast drivers, again, they put such a high importance on response. They can kind of, they don't really care as much about stability. And that's going to be different for everyone. And you're just going to go out there and make these setup adjustments using those setup parameters to figure out what you need to improve. And every time, again, just relate yourself to the VHM diagram. Make sure you and your driver are talking about the setup in regards in the definitions of the VHM. And then just look at what in the telemetry, what you need to improve. Do I need more response, do more stability, or do I need the balance shift? And you'll just keep doing that iteratively until you get something that you're pretty happy. Again, you can use telemetry to look at roll gradients, to measure response, and maybe lateral stiffness distribution to look at the balance, and any of the other tools. But anytime we talk about setups, you really want to talk about it in terms of the VHM, because you're not only considering the first order effects, but you're also considering the second order effects. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, found it very informative. If you liked the video, please hit the channel with a subscribe to get more content. I hope to be doing more videos on setup theory at least once a week. If you have any questions on this, you can leave a comment down below or on the Discord link will be in the description. We're very active. We like talking about these things. These things are really enjoyable for us to discuss. So just let us know if you have any questions and we'll try to answer it. But that's going to be it, guys. I hope you guys have a good holiday for all of you guys that are watching this around Christmas. But until next time, I'll catch you guys later.